We do have quorum. Mr. Watson won't be with us tonight. He has a prior engagement that he's attending. So because we do have 4 members here, enough for quorum, we will go ahead and call the meeting to order. And the first item is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes that anyone would like to make? Okay, seeing no objections, do you have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
Yes. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
Okay, very well, thank you. And the next item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes that Mr. Mendez had sent out. Does anyone have any objections or changes that need to be made to that?
I did my best. It was a complicated discussion.
It was very thorough and very understandable. So thank you, Mr. Mendez.
Okay, seeing no objections, is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
And I'll
Go ahead, Nancy.
No, you first, I second. Fine.
All right, Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
yes. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
and Mr. Mendez.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes. And now we are at a point of public comment. Mr. Wheeler, would you?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, can I, before we do public, may I ask a question with Mr. Wheeler, if I may?
Sure.
I'm just curious, are there, if you can tell on the webinar registrations, not, the Facebook and whatnot, but do we have anybody registered on the webinar that's like a city council candidate or someone, I'm just curious if they're, plugging into our meetings. Just been kind of curious, and I thought maybe I'd ask this time.
You're asking if they're registered, but you're not seeing them in the participant list, in the attendee
Let me
list?
see. Oh, wait a minute. I've got so many tabs up. Let me see if I can get to that. Oh, shoot. The participant list.
There are 4 attendees right now. I do not see any candidates.
Yeah, no, I don't see any. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Wheeler, would you, I guess, poll the attendees for potential public comment?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you're in the audience, you'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're on via telephone, you can press *9. If you're watching the meeting on Facebook, Boxcast, or TV 10, well, actually, we're not live on TV 10. Facebook or Boxcast, you can join us on the webinar at charlottesville.gov/Zoom. I do not see any hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very well. Get that out of there. So next on the
Chairman, we do have a hand up.
Oh, sure.
A late hand. This is Adrian Dent. Adrian, you're on with the board. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay. Hi. Sorry to be a late hand there. This may not be a question for you all, so pardon me if it's not, and feel free to raise your hand and cut me off early, but or a comment for you all. Back in, I think it was May, the police had their National Police Week and were posting online in memory of officers lost in the line of battle. I'm trying to pull up something here as I'm talking. And there was one end of watch, April 12, 1970. Well, first of all, I'm just kind of curious about, I have some real objections to that one. To whom could I most fruitfully express my concerns about the actual harm and violence of some of these posts in our community?
Well, I would think that that would be given that that it was presented by the Charlottesville Police Department. I think that you would have to contact them directly. I think that whatever avenues they choose to utilize for their media is within their purview. We don't have any control over that.
Mr. Chair, is that the police foundation that did the week? Do you know, Mr. Wheeler, if that was the foundation as opposed to CPD?
I believe Ms. Dent's referring to social media posts probably that came out of the police department.
The name, the author or whoever submitted it was Tyler Hahn.
He's their PR guy.
Yeah, so he would be your point of contact. He handles all the majority, if not all, the media for the Charlottesville Police Department.
Okay, and his superior would be the chief of
The
police?
chief.
Mm-hmm.
He reports to Major Mooney.
Major Mooney, I was going to say the assistant chief, yeah. Ms. Dent, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your concern. Could you just briefly summarize?
Sure, I will try to do that. So this was a notice about a police officer who died in 1917 after apprehending thieves that were stealing a ham from a warehouse. And then Kay Slaughter comments that the trial was a real farce with no real defendants, that the defendants did not have defense. There was like a rush trial, conviction, and hanging within the week. And I just think that's ridiculous that we're remembering a police officer from 1917 with like some real huge question marks around how that case was handled.
Thank you. Got it. Yeah, I saw that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for raising that question, Ms. Dent. Hope that you'll get a transparent answer in your quest.
And there are no other hands.
Okay, very well. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. So the next item of business, is the status of the complaints. I believe that last meeting, Ms. Carpenter had asked for a little more detail on them. Currently there have been 18 complaints for 2021. We have received, or I guess complainants have chosen to send over 11 of them. Of those 11, 8 of those are closed, 3 are still open. 2 of them we sent to the Charlottesville Police Department, and then 9 of them were sent to us within the time frame. The cases surround not basically, but they surround rights violation for trespassing. There's no demographic on that one. Police brutality and racism, black male, followed by an officer. There's no demographic. Lying, white male. Rudeness, disrespect, white male. Professionalism, white female. Rudeness, disrespect, white male. Professionalism, white female. Failure to perform, white male. Rudeness, disrespect, white trans, transgender. Aggressive treatment of disabled veteran, black male. Going back, does anyone have any questions or comments surrounding complaints?
Could you maybe, it sounds like you're reading off a list or a spreadsheet. Maybe you could share that.
Yes, I can send out the spreadsheet to amongst the board. Whether it goes to public at this point is still that question that will be left to the executive director.
Yeah, and I recall we had that discussion, I don't know, several months ago about the spreadsheet and how we can share it to the public. But that's kind of what prompted me to say, what are the generalities of these, complaints, the professionalism or the brutality or whatever. And I appreciate you kind of even providing a little bit more, information about very basic demographic about who in the community is submitting these complaints. Chairman, I appreciate that.
Sure thing. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Up next on the agenda is the update on the executive director process. Before that goes, I am disqualifying myself from participation in any board discussions or actions relating to the city's recruitment of the executive director because I have applied to be employed in that position. I have filed a written disclosure statement with the clerk of council, and that statement is available to the public upon request from Ms. Robinson or Ms. Thomas. At this time, I turn over the gavel to the vice chair until the board's discussion of the recruitment process is finished, and I ask that the minutes of this meeting reflect my verbal disclosure. Mr. Vice
Thank
Chair.
you, Bellamy. We have received a save the date or save the dates notice from the city manager for May 23rd and May 25th. The logistics of...
I think you mean June, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, okay, June 23rd and June 25th. Yeah, the logistics of that remain to be worked out. Thank you, Jeff. In terms of who will be interviewing on which day and how many people will be interviewed. I do not, have not been told how the screening process is going, but I assume if they're getting ready to do interviews, then they're pretty far along. Perhaps Ms. Marshall would know more than I.
Yes, sir. And I apologize that my camera has decided that today is not its best day. Thank you very much, Vice Chair, for allowing me to speak. We have been able to go through the applications as submitted. There were, I believe, 64 applicants that were applications that were received. The way that we are going through the process is we, of course, unfortunately had to narrow those down. And I apologize that I am pausing because this is human resources. I am not sure how much I can say, but what I can say is we will be reaching out to a select group of applicants who seem to pass the minimum requirements bar that you all have laid out in your job description. And then a panel of individuals will begin the process with round one interviews. There will be most likely 3 rounds, and PCRB individuals will be represented in all of them. Again, to make sure that we are meeting the ordinance. And a description of the process has been provided to both Vice Chair Mendez as well as Mr. Frazier, Dr. Frazier, sorry. And so they were aware and gave us the go ahead before we even moved on it, which I very much appreciate their collaboration and willingness to make sure everything is going as smoothly as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do. What was that information that you received, Mr. Mendez? Was that something that Ms. Gilmore was shared with her because she is part of the interview committee?
The email that we received was prior to setting up the interview committee. So it was, if I recall correctly, to myself and Jeff, the actual procedural memo. Let me look at this here.
Because I thought we set up our interview committee. Let's see, this is June, May. I thought it was in our April meeting because I think we were at one time expecting there to be late May interviews, which I think was probably pretty, pretty ambitious.
Yeah, to answer to answer your question, obviously it's now at the end of June. I can send I believe I can send Ms. Marshall the proposed interview proceedings to the entire board.
You can send them to the entire board other than the individual who is very graciously recused himself as being an individual who is in the applicant process. That is another reason why I'm also being very cautious, because I don't want to violate his recusal at all since he has gone through that appropriate process. So again, please forgive me for pausing, but I just want to make sure he doesn't get into any trouble either. So I apologize for that, those pauses. But if I may, Ms. Carpenter, I created that document actually after the meeting that you all had selected your 3 individuals. I was actually at that meeting. That was my first week on the job. Very happy to be able to have joined you all. The reason why it is being sent to 2 individuals from me is if I send it to more than 3, then we get into some public meeting document issues. If I send it to 2, I'm good. So Vice Chair Mendez, if you would like to share that with the committee, sans Mr. Brown, to be able to for him to stay proper in his recusal, I do not see any problem with that. Ms. Carpenter, also just to let you know, unfortunately that same FOIA rule applies in the interview process. So if we had 3 individuals in one panel, it would turn into a public meeting. So that is part of the reason why we actually are having multiple panels. So Dr. Frazier will actually sit in the round 1 panels. And then once we get a little closer and I'm able to look at dates a little better, I did not want to do that prematurely. Mrs. Gilmore and Mr. Watkins will be asked to sit in the round 2 panels. So then they remain not public meetings. In the round 3 process, all 3 PCRB individuals will be active in that, because at that point they will be giving us a name of a candidate. Since many of our candidates still are employed, it would be a closed meeting because we are speaking specifically of an individual who I am sure their employer would not necessarily like to know that they are potentially leaving. So we will make sure that we also protect the individuals who have submitted proper applications to us. So everyone will be as involved as we can and not activating FOIA.
Right, and as I understand it, there is flexibility about the various rounds and to accommodate people's schedules. So
absolutely. So I have reached out to individuals to make sure that they would be able to attend. For example, I knew that Dr. Frazier has a out of town period. So of course we did not set them during that period of time. So absolutely, I am definitely making sure that especially our PCRB members are able to attend, and that their scheduling is taking as much priority as possible. Additionally, these of course will be by Zoom, not only because we are still in a pandemic, but also depending on the choices of the panelists, there are individuals who do not live in this community. And so I hope also that that will provide assistance to all the PCRB members to be able to more comfortably attend versus having to take a lot of time and travel and sit in a room.
well, thank you, Ms. Marshall. Are there any other questions? Okay, I will send around this memo to everybody except Bellamy. And I believe that concludes this item of business.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. do have another period of public comment scheduled. I don't, Mr. Wheeler, would you mind polling the attendees?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 6 people in the audience right now. If you'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, you can always press *9. We have one raised hand at the moment. This is Molly Conger. You're on with the board. You've got 3 minutes.
Just one really quick comment. Earlier, when you were reading aloud from that spreadsheet, Mr. Brown, you said you would share it with the board, but you weren't sure if you wanted to share it with the public. If you email it to the whole board, we can just FOIA it. So by refusing to share it with the public directly, you're just making it so it costs us money to access that information. I think in the interest of transparency, it would be better for you to just share it with us outright. That's all.
Well, I appreciate that, Ms. Conger. To clarify, what I had said was that the sharing of the public would be left to the executive director whenever he or she is placed. I believe that, and we're still working through some of the, and Ms. Hudson can chime in as well. We're still working through some of the exemption processes, but that's that is something that that was considered, and I believe there may be an opportunity there to not present the public's personal information to other individuals in the public. And Ms. Hudson, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, it would certainly be prudent, even if it's your inclination to release it, to have it reviewed first for any Freedom of Information Act exemptions that you might seek to assert in your discretion.
You just seem to have sort of an ongoing disinterest in sharing information with the public, and it's been a problem for many months. And I just hope that you can be cognizant of that, of the way that comes across to the public.
Very well, Ms. Conger.
Yeah, that is very, very important, because there are very few of us boards in the state. I know Richmond has gotten theirs, and you talk about Alexandria and Virginia Beach and a few others. So, the more that we can be open to the community, I guess the better it'll be for us, in creating community support as best as we can.
And those are all valid statements, but they also have to be measured again against privacy rights and issues as well. We're not seeking to preclude. I think that most of the information that we've done, with the exception of this private information, we've disclosed to the public with our processes. They're on, some of the documents are on the actual website itself. So those are available. When you're talking about whether or not, we want to share a citizen's, private information, you go into other issues that, quite frankly, we have to be mindful of.
Mr. Chair, I would just add that I think I speak for all of us in saying that, our goal is for transparency, but we also, as you said, need to protect, the privacy rights of those that become engaged with us. So, I know I feel strongly about our board being transparent.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Are there any additional comments?
If anyone else would like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon. There will be one other opportunity later in the meeting. I don't see any hands raised.
Yeah, I think we're running into, there are a couple of meetings that are concurrent with ours that tend to, if they weren't happening, those folks would be attending our monthly meeting. So I think that's why we're seeing a significant decline in community participation, because we just happen to be running concurrently with some other larger meetings that also use this time of the month for their meeting. It's a shame.
Very well. So at this point, we are at a hearing procedures update. We do have them. I don't know if we do have them back from our legal counsel. We haven't had a chance to go through them at this point. I don't know if there's anything that Ms. Hudson would like to say or what have you.
Certainly, I'll be glad to give the board just a brief update. Given the recent expansion of the engagement of outside counsel, we've been able to now give sustained and detailed attention to the last draft of the hearing procedures. Did that this week. We've incorporated in the latest draft that we have provided to the chair at this point, edits that had been proposed by the city attorney, by Ms. Robertson. But in addition to that, we added some refinements that address some of the comments that the board received from the People's Coalition in particular in its review of the hearing procedures. And there are perhaps one other area was brought up by in those comments that we're examining more closely, quite frankly, in the same nature of what's permissible in terms of the board's interest in transparency, to the extent that law enforcement matters, of course, involve a full range of life incidents and circumstances, full transparency, which of course the board would like to maximize, is sometimes not just a matter of the board's discretion, but there's some information that is required by law to be maintained confidentially, such as matters pertaining to juveniles. So we're looking carefully at trying to strike that balance between promoting the board's and the community's legitimate interest in as much transparency as possible and what is legally permissible in that regard as it relates to the wide range of police matters, underlying subject matters that might be involved in hearings and in records received from the police department. That's the last frontier. I would expect that we could come down hard and fast on that within the next day or so, quite frankly, and give a more final draft to the chair. Or closer to final. Obviously, they're only final when you say they're final.
Does anyone have any comments or questions for Ms. Hudson?
Well, just a general comment and question is that we're certainly getting a lot of pressure to get this done. When do we know? Do we have a schedule?
You'll have everything that we've been asked to respond to in the review of the hearing procedures and the attention that we thought was prudent to bring to it, as I said, in the next day. At that point, I certainly defer to the chair as to the schedule on which it'll be submitted to you all for approval and finalization.
So basically the next step then would be for us to look at it and vote, or discuss it at our next meeting and vote.
Yeah, I would imagine that the one that that I'd received, like I said, I hadn't gotten a chance to look at it as of yet, but you should have that here now. But this the additions that she's speaking of, would happen in the next 24 hours or so. So those would be incorporated into what you have now.
So,
and then we could, so yeah, by next meeting, we should be able to have a pretty significant discussion. And if there are no other, issues, then we could go ahead and move it to vote. We will put this on the website as well, to have the public view it in that time period, so that they can provide any additional input, and kind of, I guess that would take care of it. Mr. Frazier, Dr. Frazier, you have any other questions?
Nope, no, it works for me. Thank you.
Yes, Ms.
Well,
Carpenter.
just being, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. So you're saying that with this new review of what our draft was of the ordinance, our hearing ordinance, we will receive a new updated draft hearing ordinance incorporating any of these suggestions that are forthcoming from Ms. Hudson's review of this hearing ordinance?
No. So what you have just recently is the incorporation it was the previous draft with the incorporation of the People's Coalition comment, the city attorney's comments. I believe that the chief of police did have some comments in there as well as some another attorney in the community, and those were incorporated into what you had to what was sent out. And I guess there is going to be a subsequent follow up in the next day or so, or an addendum to that, and that will kind of be what we'll be discussing and potentially voting on at the next meeting.
So are we going to have a period of public comment prior to our vote? For one last, in case anybody has not had a chance to, weigh in. I was just curious.
Correct. As I mentioned, this will go on the public website as well. So for the review of the 30, to cover the 30-day review, imagine we'd circle it back around to the People's Coalition as well, and the other stakeholders who have provided input.
So just to, procedurally, is this an update to our bylaws under the current ordinance? Because if it's an update to our bylaws, someone has to propose it at a meeting, and then it can be adopted at the next meeting, as I understand it.
No.
Okay.
This is just to cover. So this is specifically the aim of this was to cover the hearing procedures under the pre-July 1.
Under the current bylaws, yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Fine.
Under the current ordinance, current ordinance with a view toward July 1 powers. So this is to cover our requested review hearing, so that we can, properly facilitate that, and then, so that's what it's for.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, okay. You say July 1 powers, but our draft ordinance, which is the next thing on the agenda, doesn't really give us the powers July 1 into transition time, correct? But as we'll get into.
So it's so that the hearing itself takes into consideration that, the one prior case, but also the view of, of what those powers, as the General Assembly has articulated them, what they would look like. It doesn't mean that they're, we're fully going to operate under those for this particular hearing, because those powers weren't considered at that point in time. So go ahead, Mr.
I was going to say, so in this hearing, we're not going to have subpoena power.
Right.
So that's the idea, is to get through this one hearing that we have pending.
Correct. And then
we don't have the power to make a disciplinary recommendation.
Correct.
Good.
And then,
got it.
But there has been a view to add to, with a view that this would be a base to move forward for the new powers.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Next on the agenda is discussion of the ordinance progress, and I will turn that over to Mr. Mendez.
Sure. Mostly what has been going on is a series of two-on-two meetings between members of our work group and selected sort of a round robin of the city council. And so the meetings that have happened so far have involved me and Jeff Frazier. And so if I make any mistakes in summarizing what has happened so far, I'm sure he can correct me. Our first meeting took place about a week and a half ago with Councilors Snook and Payne, and they had been given the draft ordinance, the working draft ordinance, and which included the disciplinary powers section. And to date, we have received written comments from Councilor Snook. in which he strongly implied that he was uncomfortable with an investigative model. I'll go back to that in a while. In his sort of lawyerly way, he wanted to know how the board would handle complaints involving criminal charges, how the intertwining of potential criminal versus administrative actions would be handled. And at one point in his comments, he sort of proposed a model that looked very much like the executive director would act like a sort of a monitor, checking on internal affairs investigations, and basically reporting if they found problems, and that sort of that amounted to going back to a review model. And so we were, Jeff and I were pretty annoyed or nonplussed, as you might say, that was the attitude that was communicated. Mr. Counselor Snook also suggested that, it would be a bad idea to have multiple groups involved in doing investigations, and he was still not really clear on what the internal affairs would be doing at a time when we ourselves were trying to do investigations. Since we did our best to respond to his written comments. And just about an hour ago or 2 hours ago, we received a short email. I received a short email from Counselor Snook saying, no, he's really not opposed to an investigative model, but he really doesn't understand where the internal affairs would fit into that, and how we would avoid duplicative investigative efforts. And on the whole, I think he's still very skeptical about the investigative model, but again, flexible. We haven't heard anything from Michael Payne yet. I'll keep prodding him to see if he has any written comments. And just this week, just this Tuesday, Jeff and I met with Counselors Hill and McGill. And again, they had copies of our ordinance. And the best way I could describe it was that Ms. Hill had very strong reservations about the board's ability to do an independent investigation. And I think, would probably come down on the negative side of that question. Ms. McGill, who's also had a lot of strong reservations, but I think her objections were more practical, based on experience wherein very ambitious structures had been put in place without sufficient thought or resources to actually make them work. Ms. Hill raised the question that how do you keep the board from being filled up by any police activists who would be unfair to the police. And she wants to make very sure that particularly the chairperson would be trained and qualified to handle procedures and to understand the legal issues that were involved. The meeting with these two counselors was only an hour, so we didn't talk as much as we would like about some issues. One of the things that we've done is we've referred them to the our April training session on investigations, and they both expressed interest that, well, gee, yeah, we really would like to know how independent investigations would work. And so, with luck, they may come around. But to this point, I think that we have gotten not a huge amount of encouragement on an investigative model. Tomorrow, Bellamy and I are going to be talking to Mayor Walker, and we shall see how that goes. I think what we're looking for is someone on the board, someone on the council who will champion, police oversight and move it forward, because we're kind of stuck in a rut now of responding to comments and then responding to more comments, and then, so there are questions about how to go forward. Now, Jeff, do you have any?
Bill, the only thing I would add, and I don't know if I think Councilor Hill's concern had to do with the executive director did you mean to say director or board chair up to speed on the whole model? Because I also heard her expressing concerns about making sure the executive director had the credentials, had the training, understood what we were trying to do. Is that comport with what you were hearing?
I'm sure she had. There was very little about the model that she didn't have reservations about. So
yeah,
I would say that it's clear. I mean, there is certainly, and again, I think we have to take a little bit of responsibility for it. They are not experts on oversight models, and so. They don't know what an executive director does, and in different organizations, the executive director does different things.
Yes.
And so, Councilor Snook thought of the executive director as kind of a monitor or an auditor, and some other people think of the executive director as the person who's actually going to go out and do the investigations. And we had to, we've, tried to do our best to explain that no, we're going to have certified, highly credentialed investigators, and it's not going to be turned over to amateurs.
Yeah, I don't know if Ms. Hudson has thoughts about this, but my overarching feeling is that we're really doing an educational piece here. I mean, trying to get counselors up to speed on the intricacies and the complexity of the model, and no fault of theirs. They're busy, they've got a million things to read and look at, but I really feel like in the two meetings that Bill and I have been in, a lot of it was just trying to correct misperceptions, clarify misunderstandings, give examples. I mean, I think we have a ways to go on educating counsel, and I think if we don't do that adequately, we're not going to get much traction. And I don't know, Cynthia, if just from your experience in the public sector and in the private sector, if you have thoughts about that or recommendations about how to sort of tackle that challenge.
Certainly be happy to sit down with you and Mr. Mendez or whatever subgroup of the board is assigned this responsibility and brainstorm about an approach, but I can say this, that an ordinance draft that the board is supportive of is probably, even if it's just preliminarily supportive of, that gives the council member pair that you are speaking with something to react to and comment upon, gives some context for your discussions going forward, and perhaps might more quickly advance or more effectively advance your conversations. But one thing I've learned in public life and representing public bodies is that you don't give legal advice from the day. But I'm certainly glad to meet with with a subgroup of the board. I believe it's you and Mr. Mendez, and we
Correct.
can talk about a strategy going forward.
Okay, and I didn't mean legal advice. I just meant
No,
the
I understand.
challenge of trying to educate,
Organizational, yeah.
get them up to
absolutely
speed,
understand.
because it's a very complicated document, and we're in the weeds with it. They're not, and a lot of the questions, as I heard them, and Bill, you can correct me, were based upon just ignorance of what we're trying to do. Just they're not being. And again, this is not a criticism, it's just the reality of the workload, but they're not being really in the weeds in terms of understanding. When one of the counselors says, this whole thing seems to me a solution in search of a problem, we had to spend some time just trying to lay out the fact that he said there's been no officer involved shootings in Charlottesville. And our position was, well, that's not the level at which we're concerned. That it's more daily, ongoing problems that need to be addressed. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Where there's just a disconnect between our what we're proposing and sort of how they conceptualize it. Bill, would you add to that?
I don't pretend to be an expert in police oversight, but the more I get into it, when every time I talk to people from another oversight organization, we are not alone. I mean, all of these issues that people raise about amateur boards and biased boards and not being able to do investigations, and it's going to be too expensive, and it's going to be too complex. That's
Okay. May I chime in for a second? This work has been great, but getting in the community is like, where are we at? When are we going to present something? I mean, we're already talking about in the ordinance, we're not going to adopt any of these things until January of 2022. It's like, I don't know why that's so long, why we're not just giving them something, letting them, talk about it, put them, on the table for whatever they want to say or not say. I also want to ask if we can't, loop in our city council candidates. We've got Mr. Wade, Mr. Pinkston, Ms. Washington, and of course, Ms. Walker has been involved with this from the get-go. So I think she's probably fairly versed in this, but I think we should also reach out to them, because some of those folks are going to be the ones that we're going to be dealing with in 2022. And to just talk about the five that are on there now, there are going to be two others at some point. They're going to be in there even longer. And I think it would bode well to incorporate those folks as well in your talks as you can. Because we do have that election coming up in November. Complexion will change. Priorities will change on city council. And, we need to keep a step ahead of that. And I think we also need to, wrap this up, put the bow on it, let them open the box and, make their decision. And then we can come back as a board and, request changes. I mean, that's what the operating procedures do allow for us to review our own policies and, update things. I mean, I don't want to drag this out. I mean, we're already talking August before we even get an executive director, it sounds like, just from the timeline that Ms. Marshall was talking about in reviewing, the resumes and things coming in. I just, people are getting tired of waiting on us.
No, I understand that, Ms. Carpenter, but please understand, from my perspective, we want to get this right. I mean, we don't get but so many bites out of this apple, and I don't want to give them a half-baked proposal, which then gets chewed up and spit back out, because, I
don't think it is.
I agree it isn't, but I want to get it right, and I want to do it thoughtfully, and if we rush it, there's a chance that, it's going to blow back. So just balance that against, I appreciate everything you're saying, and I agree with the community's wish to get it done, but I want to get it done right. That's speaking for myself as a board member.
Yeah, and Nancy, the next question I was going to ask the board, and thank you, you asked it instead, was, what is the best path forward? Sort of our goal all along has been to generate a draft ordinance that we as a board are comfortable with, and that has been reviewed by the major stakeholders, and again, and our legal counsel by July. And so we're not going to sit around. I don't think we're going to sit around. I'm certainly not going to sit around because there's plenty to be done. My thought on this was, that the next steps, well, let's go back a second. Councilor Snook has suggested that that it's fine to propose an ordinance as long as you've thought about what you're going to do in your operating procedures. And so that pulling something together in July would be totally feasible. And then he suggests that based on his experience, that we would then be able to develop operating procedures and present them to the council during the summer. And have something on their agenda by September. So, we're not talking about waiting till 2022. That transition point was in that section of the document was not later than January 1st, 2022. So we're certainly not giving away 6 months. Any event, what I had thought, I think is still feasible, is to get a council ready draft by about 1st of July or by the first week of July, and which would include all of the powers that we have discussed and reached consensus on, including investigations, subpoenas, disciplinary recommendations, audit, and that we could have that ready, and we can accompany it with a set of annotations so that for each section we would explain in plain language what the objective is, what was the history of the development, why is it here, and why do we do it this way, are there any legal issues and how have they been addressed, and what needs to be addressed in our operating procedures in relation to that section of the ordinance. Now, I think that's, the first step of that, sort of generating a new document in the next couple of weeks is feasible. But then if we're going to, approve it, say at our next scheduled meeting on the second Thursday in July, we're all going to need to read it. We're all going to need to be up to speed on it. We're all going to have to be satisfied, that this is what we want. I think we should go for it myself.
I mean, there were a number of things that I guess that I wanted to bring out, and I meant to do this earlier, but over the weekend, speaking of the candidates, there were a couple of candidates who basically were disinclined or unsupportive of our efforts regarding investigative and disciplinary power. I want to make it known publicly that at no point in time did any of those candidates meet with the board members to become informed about their positions. I think when you're looking at asking for votes across the community to include the communities that are heavily policed, when you make statements like that, when there are legitimate grievances from the government services that they are receiving, it does a disservice to their voice. And I think that community leaders across the board, and that includes those who are wearing the uniform because they are in fact community leaders. We have to look at how we best serve the community. That includes the government and the executive branch as well. We have to look at collectively how we best serve the community. And we're not talking about just one part of the community where you have, positive policing experiences. We're talking about the entire community. Um, I am set to meet with candidate Wade, and I've invited both of them to uh, our upcoming July 30th training by NACOL, which is specifically geared for counselors. But as has been noted, this idea and historically, whenever oversight boards have attempted to get started, there has been a weakness uh, by politicians and a public campaign by policing to make sure that those aren't successful. I think as small a community as we are, where everybody knows everybody, we need to look at everybody as somebody and realize that they are a part of this community as well. As far as getting back to your statement of going forward, Bill, I'm in agreement with that. One of the things that I significantly question is when all of this work, primarily spearheaded by you, has been done on this side with regard to oversight and everything else, and makes us the best informed in this space. How just seeing how much deference is given to the government, and how this lack of taking a stronger interest in this very real serious space where you're dealing with HR issues, you're dealing with privacy issues, you're dealing with all of these issues. I mean, this is what the community is paying our leaders for. And I think that we have to do this, obviously not us, we're a volunteer board, but we have to do this in that manner, in that stead. We have to get in there and we have to educate ourselves so that we're not relying solely on what the government is saying about the grievances that community members are presenting about the government.
Yeah, I do recommend to you, if you can spend a few minutes on the podcast I sent around earlier today, which was basically a story about how police oversight grew up in Oakland and Berkeley after the shooting of a young black man in a bar, on a BART train. You could quote from these actors. They're saying exactly the same things in terms of, on the police side, they're saying exactly the same things. On the government side, they're saying exactly the same thing. The community is just saying exactly the same thing, and it's kind of a tragedy. They don't, there's a sort of this lack of understanding and living in very different worlds. But the bottom line on that for me is that we have to. And maybe it's just my temperament is that, okay, let's bang our head against the wall a little bit longer, and maybe it'll break. We'll do it politely, however.
Well, I think I think all stakeholders need to come with from an open perspective. I realize that, we've been getting tarred and feathered for quite some time. Whether that's right or wrong, I think there, as a substantive aspect of this board that is seeking to do what's in the best interest of the community as a whole. And I think that good faith effort that has been presented needs to be taken as such. And there has to be more more work done across the board to do what's in the best interest of the community.
Well, I think one thing I can say is that having these Zoom calls, which has been very helpful, in exchange of views. We just ought to keep going. Maybe other members of the board, because that's, we do need to hear those concerns.
Mr. Chair, I think if everybody's not at least a little bit unhappy, we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
It's a different world in here. Nobody likes you.
Yeah. No,
Exactly. We're not on this board as a popularity contest, right?
What? Well. So it sounds, I'm sort of, again, I can sort of go back to the work group and start one more revision. This is kind of the final one, because I think we are all agreed on we would like to propose an investigative model. We understand that there are reservations on the other side about the investigative model. We have explained that to all of our stakeholders, and so it's not going to come as a terrible shock. And if, eventually when we propose the investigative model, we'll say we did it for this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. It's going to cost this much and about this much, and it's going to take about this long. And if they want to push back at that point, okay, then at least they'll be, we'll know what we're fighting.
Are they, did you get the answer that you were looking for, Mr. Mendez, regarding next steps?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I'll keep everybody posted on, and ask for suggestions and comments as we go forward.
Okay. Are there any additional comments or questions? Okay. We do have on the agenda next another public comment period. Mr. Wheeler, would you poll the attendees, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 7 people in the audience. If you'd like to address the board, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to address the board. First up is Harold Foley. Harold, you're on with the board. You've got 3 minutes.
Hey, I want to say thank you all for the hard work that y'all been doing. This is, I said before, pressure bust pipes or create diamonds. And I think this would be a great time to create a diamond, right? If y'all don't have the courage to do the right thing, city council won't. Jeff, you got on this board to make sure that things are heading in the right direction, right? But we got to get city council to understand what is the right direction, because y'all got the opportunity to drive this boat. Mr. Brown, I don't know if those candidates have the courage to be able to be thoughtful and be about what happened, because I tell you, I've been with this PCRB since the first iteration, right? And what happened was city council destroyed the first iteration bylaws and operation procedures, the whole thing, right? So what city council did was give y'all a broken bike and y'all riding a broken bike, trying to fix another bike, trying to create another bike, right? And that's really bad, right? And so, it's funny, but it's hard as hell to say, right? Because we want to get this right, right? And I think sometimes people are afraid to be the first, right? Because Charlottesville will be the first in the state to do this, right? Charlottesville will probably be the first in United States to have the powers that y'all have. And so with that, I think y'all keep doing what you got to do. Keep working with the People's Coalition and the people who's outside working to make this happen. And we will GSD this. So thank y'all so much. I appreciate you.
If I can just respond very quickly, Mr. Foley, Alexandria has beaten us to the punch on their ordinance. But their ordinance is a very sparse document that doesn't describe a lot of procedures. If you're interested in it, it's on their website.
If there's anyone else who'd like to address the board, now would be the time to click the raise hand icon. I do not see any additional hands.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. So it looks like July 30th is going to be the date for our final training, but the training will actually be geared towards city council and the city council candidates. NACOL has gone to different cities to present this particular workshop to different councils to kind of give them some more information to get them up to speed, and so they will that's what will be presented in our last training with them, and that's going
Mr.
to
Chair,
be
did you mean June 30th or July 30th?
yes sir, sorry, June 30th. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
We're all confused now, so.
Sorry, June 30th, this month, June 30th, will be that
Okay.
will be that training. All right, that brings us to our end. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Ms. Robinson?
Yes, Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yeah.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
and Mr. Mendez.
Yes.
Very well. Thank you all for your service. And Bill, I don't know if I can say that publicly, but I thank you for your service and what you've done for our board and for this community. I was going to say I'd buy you a scotch, so I already said it now. But it's greatly appreciated and
No gratuities.
yeah,
Okay.
it's greatly appreciated. So.
Mr. Chair, if I could just echo that, having been working with Mr. Mendez with these council meetings, I can't say it loudly enough in terms of his contribution. It's just off the charts, and I think we all owe him a tremendous gratitude for the hours and hours that he's put into this. So I don't want to embarrass him, but it's just been impressive, and I don't know, we wouldn't be where we are without Mr. Mendez's contribution. So, and I also wanted to thank Ms. Hudson and Ms. Marshall. But Bill, you just knocked it out of the park.
Well, it ain't over yet.
I know, but you certainly, this is why we pay you the big bucks, Bill.
Precisely. Well, yeah. All right.
Fair enough. Everyone have a good night.
Thanks,
Good night,
everyone.
all.
All right.
Bye-bye.